Welcome back to the Bootleg Universe. I'm Sam Lasky here with our fearless leader, Adi Shankar. Adi, would you like to introduce our incredible guest today?
One of my oldest friends in the industry, and he's really not my friend because of the industry. He's just a great guy, great human being. He's a producer. He's also a talent manager of screenwriters. John Zaozirny.
So I think for aspiring writers, there's a lot of focus on how do you get representation, right? How do you get a manager? How do you get an agent? And there's not enough focus on what that relationship looks like moving forward. How do you maintain it after you've gotten it? How do you make the most of a relationship with a manager and agent? So today we wanted to talk about how and why some client-manager relationships fail.
Sure.
But then also, like, how do you set it up to succeed in the best possible way, right?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is kind of the same answer, which is, and, you know, I've seen this a lot. And what I would say is, you know, when you first start working with a client, at least when I first start, I can only speak for myself, or my company, when I first start working with a client, when you sign them, you know, you meet with them and you say, here's the strategy, right? And the strategy tends to be either I've read a script of yours and it's so great that we're going to take it out as is, or we're going to do some work on it and then we're going to take it out to the town. Or often, I've read your script, I really like it, I don't think this is the one to take out, but let's work on a new one, right? And that's kind of like the three derivations. It's either so good, we'll just take it out as is. Number two, let's do some work on it. Number three, I think you're talented, but let's find a different thing to kind of go out with. But in either case, you want to be like, here's the strategy and kind of go into detail. Like, here's what we're going to do. Here's roughly the first few months. Here's this. Here's, you know, I think the thing should be done by this point, and then we'll do this. And so have a clear visual game plan for, let's say, the first year, and then, you know, where it goes from that point forward. And, you know, you want to kind of have a lot of clarity from yourself and from the client. And where I would say that I've sometimes gotten into, you know, issues, sometimes very early on, and that's why I try to be really as explicit as possible, and that start to be like, here's what the strategy is this is what the thing's going to do. And I've had clients, you know, I literally had a client early on who we were like, here's the strategy, we're going to develop with you, we're going to develop a new idea, we're going to do this, and they were like, great. And then 2 weeks later they fired us because we started developing with them, and they were like, we don't really like to develop, you know. And it was, you know, which is fine, they sent us a nice bottle of wine to apologize and all that kind of stuff. But that, you know, but I've also had it happen later on in the relationship where people thought, oh, this is what I thought I wanted, or some people, what they want from representation is not necessarily someone who's going to push them. They want someone who's going to agree with them, or at least agree with their iteration of what the thing is. You know, for me, if a client says, I want to write Marvel movies, for example, how do we get you to that point? What are the steps that, you know, it's not going to be like tomorrow you're writing a Marvel movie. It's like there are multiple steps to get to that point. But if you say, I don't ever want to write a Marvel movie, I want to be an independent indie writer director. Okay, well, that's a different path. You know, I think sometimes where you have problems is someone says, I want to write Marvel movies, but then they treat it like it's an indie writer director situation. And so what the short answer is, you know, you want to have a very clear vision and a very clear strategy stepped out from the jump. And sometimes either they agree with the strategy, but they don't like it, or they heard you and they didn't really, you know, that's where you have issues. And sometimes what they think they want out of the relationship changes. They said, I think I wanted someone to be very, you know, I think you know me, that I'm very, very involved in my client's life. What they really want is more of a manager who's more like an agent and just says, this is great, I'm taking it out tomorrow. You know, they're not looking for someone to kind of push things, or they're not interested in that in my notes, you know? And so I think that's where you can have issues. But the general issue is, you know, you've lost the shared vision for the forward strategy of the career.
And it also sounds like expectations are not aligned. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of my job, is setting expectations correctly, I would say. Like, I always make the joke, like, if someone comes to me and says, hey, I want to write a $100 million Western starring teenagers, I'd be like, well, here's the issues. Number one, $100 million movies don't get made that often. Number two, very few people make Westerns anymore. And very few people make movies starring teenagers, or certainly expensive ones, because there's almost no teenage movie stars. So that's going to make it really hard. I'll never tell a client, don't write this script, I'm dropping you if you write this script. But I will say it's going to be very difficult. Now, look, if they write it and then it doesn't sell, or things don't happen with it, you know, if they like, hey, I knew it was a long shot, that's okay. That's fine. But sometimes people are like, yeah, I know it's going to be hard. And then they're like, well, why didn't it sell? And it's like, well, you made it really difficult for yourself, and then it didn't happen. There's never any guarantees. in these things. And, so that can oftentimes be an issue in terms of I need to set their expectations correctly. And sometimes they hear me and sometimes they don't,
So if I was just like a writer and I came to you, right, and I was like, John, I need you to represent me, bro. What are three concrete things I can do, like once a week or every day, like whatever it is, to kind of maximize you and your powers?
Are you asking before he agrees to represent or after?
No, after. So John's in.
Yeah.
John's like, thank you for the clarification. John's in. He's like, yeah. Let's help you get to this next level, right? And
it kind of depends on what the level is, what the goal is to some degree. But I would say, look, the way that I work, and it is different than some. I would say the weird thing is like every manager operates in a different thing. I'm very much a development-oriented manager, as you know. They're not all managers are like that. Some managers are like, hey, whatever the client wants to do, I'm down with that. I'll just figure it out after the fact. I'm very much like to be like, hey, what are your ideas? Tell me your ideas this early on, and I'll be like, again, I don't ever tell a client, don't write that, but I say, hey, if you write that, then it's going to be an uphill battle. I had situations with clients where we agreed, hey, you should write this thing, and we went as far as like outlining the whole thing, like for months, and then they were like, I don't feel like writing this anymore. By the way, I wrote this whole other thing you told me not to write, and that's where I feel like my time was wasted, And at the end of the day, I'm not paying them a salary; they're also not paying me a salary, but I think we have a plan. What you can do is use me as a resource. I'm the person reading all the trades. I'm the person talking to executives and buyers and people. I know what they're looking for. So if you're trying to do something, hey, here's the plan. And the other thing I would say is like oftentimes an issue that I'll have is I'll be like, hey, I don't think this is original enough. I don't think this is fresh enough. This feels familiar to me. And the client's like, well, it's good enough. And I think good enough is a really dangerous phrase because it's a very competitive, market. I mean, there are more players in the NFL than there are feature writers in the WGA West. And so if you're going to go out with good enough, it's probably not going to get you where you need to go. You've got to be operating at the highest level of quality. And that's kind of how, as a company, I try to operate is I only take out things I really can put my whole heart behind, But sometimes for writers, they're like, you know what, I've hit my wall and I just want to take it out. It's good enough, And I think that's what I would say in terms of someone working with me is I need you to push yourself. And, Ian Shore, who was one of my first clients, what he always says, he's like, you can't go with idea A or idea B. You have to go with idea C, maybe D or E even, because A, B, or C are generally kind of like you've seen it before, you've done it before. You've got to push yourself for that idea that you haven't quite seen before or that twist on something. Because if you're choosing the idea that's first on the brain, most often it's a familiar one. And so you have to push yourself. And so that's the thing I would say is like, use your manager as a resource to be like, hey, is this the right, does this push my career forward? Where am I trying to get to? And does this push it towards? And then when you're bringing those ideas, making sure that they are the highest quality possible.
Right. Because it sounds like what you're saying, the way I'm interpreting it, is you are a conduit to the industry at large.
Yes.
It's not just your relationships, it's also intel. Right,
yes.
You're also the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. You're like you're getting all the intel, and you're trying to communicate it to your clients, and it's on the client to ask you questions as well, right? To like kind of prod and say
our agendas are linked. I don't make money unless they make money, right? Like no one's paying me consulting fee or something like that. I get 10% when they sell something. So it's actually linked, And so if I'm saying, hey, I don't think this is good enough or I'm not ready to go out with it, that's how sometimes a manager that, by the way, I've taken out stuff just as is because it was just good enough, But there are a lot of managers out there who take out, hundreds of scripts a year because they're just thrown against the wall to see what happens. And if they get a lucky one, hey, it was like they put as little in for maximum return. Got it. But that's not kind of how I operate. But, what I'm looking for is to push your career forward. So absolutely use me as an intel center because, our goals are linked in that sense.
So there's obviously the writing and development portion of helping build your clients' careers. But then, you have to send them out into the world, not just the scripts, but
the people
absolutely. Themselves. And it's sort of like, first day of kindergarten when you're first sent out into the industry. Yeah. Your parents can pack your lunch for you. They can make sure you have pencils and everything you need. But you have to go to school and succeed out there. How do you prep clients to go on the couch and water bottle tour take meetings, do pitches? What does that aspect look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I literally just talked about it. It's funny because I just had a kid, so I was a client was going out on these generals, and the script's gone out and been very well received. We have a number of producers chasing it, also a number of general meetings, and that's great. We're building a fan base for the client.
So this is a spec script that
Correct.
people are looking to attach themselves to
Yes.
to try to get the project made, not necessarily just get the writer hired onto.
Yes, exactly.
got it.
Like so, there are producers. First off, there's producers taking meetings specifically because they want to produce the project, and then there are producers taking general meetings where they're like, "Hey, the project wasn't for us, but clearly this is a talented writer. I want to get to know this person." So speaking particularly. Because the I want to produce your project meeting, those meetings tend to go pretty good because they're basically saying, hey, I love you and I'd love to be your partner, essentially. So those meetings are relatively easy to take because they're kissing your ass,
Right.
Because they want something from you,
Sure.
right? It's a rare time that a writer is in a position where people are kissing their ass, not the
'cause
other way around.
It's usually, hey, please attach me to this, or here's a
Please
small
hire
option
me,
fee,
yeah.
or
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
let me
So-
latch onto this and
Exactly.
leech onto.
So the
not leech.
general meeting is more, I think, what you're kind of
Yeah.
talking about. And I realized this client, he's like, hey, I feel like we're not pitching my new projects enough or whatever. And I was like, oh, I didn't have that conversation with you because we started taking the project. I had a baby like 1 week. My wife had a baby 1 week earlier, and I was just like, didn't even think. I was like just getting him into the world. And so I actually had the conversation with him yesterday. And what I told him about general meetings is that first off, they're kind of like dates. The goal is not to like pitch 5 projects and get them to like go for it necessarily. If anything, the goal is to get them to, if you don't talk about work for an entire hour, that's a great general meeting because it means they really connected with you on a personal level. What I want them to come away with is be like, hey, I just met Jeff and he's amazing. I gotta find out where he works with Jeff. He's awesome. I'm less interested in, oh, I heard Jeff's new idea and I want it first. The general meeting is kind of like this. On one side, there's the executive. What the executive wants from you is A, just to get to know you, but B, they want to hear, oh, what's your next idea? I liked your old idea. Didn't like it enough to want it, but what's your next idea? And given whatever your next idea is, I want to call dibs on it. I want to go shotgun. I got it first. I want to hear it first. I want to work with you on it for free. They're trying to like find your idea and get on board it, right? As a writer, you don't want to give it away for free. I want to be in a situation just like I'm in right now where multiple producers are chasing after something. I can create a competitive situation essentially and get them to play off against each other's and try to like get a director or an actress attached. So that'll kind of push the project forward because they're being like, hey, look what I did. I got an actress on board. Therefore, I should be the producer. That's what I want them to do. So I don't want you to give them something early and exclusive because we lose our leverage by doing that. They can get it when they get it. What I want them to come away with is, I love Jeff. He's the greatest person of all time. I got to work with him. In fact, here's a new idea. Here's an idea that I brought to the table. Here's a magazine. Here's a book we optioned. Here's, we need a reread on this project that's set up over at Warner Brothers. I want them to come. I want you to get work off of this general meeting. And it might not be tomorrow. It might be 6 months from now, or it might be, a year from now. And they're staffing a TV show. And I'm like, hey, remember Jeff? Wouldn't he be great for this? Yeah, Jeff's a great guy. I should hire him. And you've built a fan base that will exist for years and years to come.
But here's what I don't understand about some of this stuff, right? And it's weird because I've been, as you know, I've been doing this for a while.
As long as I have, yeah.
But like there's some things where I just have like no knowledge. Like, so if you're a writer, you're doing you wrote a spec script. It got on the blacklist or the hit list or one of these things, right? You got a little bit of heat in town.
Right.
Someone didn't buy the thing, but now everyone's talking to you.
Sure.
So you take a meeting at Netflix, you take a meeting at WB, you take what do you do after that, right? Or is it completely on you to then navigate that? Like, or is the writer supposed to like kind of email the executive and be like, hey, I was thinking about, like, what do they do?
I prefer it to be I like to be in the incoming call business.
Yeah.
It depends on your level of heat, right? Like, so take my wife. My wife is Elise Hollander who wrote Blonde Ambition, which was #1 on the 2016 Blacklist. Since she wrote that script, it's all been assignment work for her at that point. She's never written another spec. It's just been, things have been coming in endlessly. So that was the situation. That was the optimal situation where she wrote a script, she sold it. That led to an assignment work at Universal, and that led to another assignment at Sony, and so on and so forth. And so there has never been any significant point where she wasn't being hired for something.
Okay, but
that's the ideal scenario.
But even with Elise, right? Like, there's sometimes just general meetings.
Yeah.
that happen, right?
Right.
There's just general meetings that happen sometimes.
But yeah, both of those are great because she took a general meeting with an executive at Sony. That executive was like, hey, I think she'd be perfect to adapt this magazine article called Queens of the Stone Age, and then Elise gets that. Elise pitches on it. She's still got a pitch on it, but like it's kind of like going on a professional date, right? Like it's like you meet this person, you're like, they're really great. I want to work with them some more.
So your wife, Elise, she's a wonderful human being. Also a very, very, very talented writer who also has a lot of heat. Her script, Blonde Ambition, it was like a Madonna biopic, placed number 1 on the Blacklist. Mike DeLuca, DeLuca now runs Warner Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like DeLuca was like producing it. Like, what was it like navigating? Because you're also her manager.
Right. I'm not married to any other clients.
So what's the experience been over the last, year?
Right. I mean,
It's early, 3 years, right? 4 years.
2016, brother.
20.
Oh,
fuck.
wow. Okay.
What's happening?
So what was the immediate experience like, and how have you helped develop her career after that initial round of heat?
I mean, look, Elise is kind of like the ideal scenario. That's something where she wrote the script and it was incredibly, well received. And it led to it selling to a major studio. That led to assignment work, and that led to another assignment work. And she was doing what we used to call the water bottle tour, because you go all over town and get a bunch of water bottles, which nowadays everything's Zoom, so it doesn't happen quite that way. And she just made a lot of fans in town. A lot of people wanted to work. A lot of people were sending her stuff. Hey, this is what you should work on. And one thing we decided on early when she was in that position was you've only got to engage on something that you 100% connect to and that you know that you can do an amazing job at. Because what can happen is you write one great screenplay and the next one's like, it's okay, And people are like, they don't have the magic, You want to keep delivering. Yeah. And so she eventually engaged on this project called Queens of the Stone Age that was brought to her by an executive at Sony, and she did an amazing job on that. That ended up on the Blacklist as well. And so that really, people are like, once you've done it, it was interesting. Once she had done it once with Blind Ambition, great, but then she did a second time with Queens of the Stone Age, and also the executive and the producers on it were incredibly happy with her work on it. And so that was a situation where suddenly there were a lot of fans, and there were even more incoming calls, because it's one thing to do it once, it's another thing to do it twice, and especially for a studio and to deliver on what they're looking for. So that led to, more opportunities. She just most recently wrote Guys and Dolls for TriStar with Bill Condon, who's directing. And so she's really kind of, to some degree, found a bit of a niche, in particular with the music stuff. But that's your optimal scenario.
What are some strategies that other clients of yours could employ? Because I mean, look, Elise knows you very well, clearly, right? You guys are married, but there's things that she's doing outside of the scope of marriage. It's like as
there's also a social game aspect to it, which I think is something that writers can sometimes be really allergic to, I would say. But the social game is really huge, particularly, I think it's huge in TVs and features. But in TV, more often than not, other writers tend to make those decisions, the showrunners, so on. But in features, it's very driven by executives and producers, and to some degree talent and directors when you get to that level. But that is an aspect where I think that's kind of goes back to talking about general meetings of making champions around town. We actually just got a really nice gift bag from a really prominent financier producer, because of my wife just giving birth. And it sent over to Elise, and the executive sent in CC, the head of the company, said, we want to find a way to work together. We love you, and they've never actually worked. They've sent Elise a bunch of things, but it's never quite been the right fit. But that's executive saying, I want to work with you. And so that's an aspect I think you want to try to find and make champions. And that's easier said than done. But what that really is making people feel like you can fix problems for them. Chris McQuarrie spoke about this, actually. He said, he had this great interview, which weirdly isn't online anymore, in Empire magazine. And he said he went from looking at executives and saying, why aren't you buying my stuff? And saying, I have a specific set of skills that I'm really good at. You have problems. How can I fix your problems? And so I think when people look at someone like my wife, they're like, oh, we have this issue. We have a script and it's not quite working, or we have this idea and it feels kind of dated. Can you come in and give us what we need? It's why you see someone like Diablo Cody wins the Oscar for Juno, incredibly fresh, new voice, and like, hey, will you go write a draft of Barbie, which at the time felt like a very dusty property, saying, hey, you have a fresh, unique voice. Can you take something that seems boring and old fashioned and make it fresh, And so I think when you're coming and you want to help people and make people feel like you will solve problems for them, you'll make them look good to their bosses. A good buddy of mine, this guy called Will Bell, who wrote Gangster Squad, Aquaman. He has Beverly Hills Cop 4 in production right now. And he used to be an LAPD policeman for like 10 years, essentially. And he would talk about how when he goes in for assignments, there's this kind of feeling of like, he like would talk about back when he was a cop, talking about like, here's what an operation is going to look like. You're going to have a big success and they're going to be in the presses and stuff like that. And he's like, you've got to let them know what victory looks like, And so when he would go in for an assignment, he's like, in an optimal world, here's what our success looks like. And that doesn't mean he gets every single job, but he has a very clear vision of what the Will Bell version of this movie is going to look like. Then obviously you got to deliver on that. But if you got to have a track record of delivering on it, like someone like Michael Green, I would say. Michael Green is certainly one of the most prominent writers in Hollywood right now. And he's like, I have to imagine he's like a fixer, Michael Green comes in, like I just saw he just was the most recent writer on this movie, Carry On, over at Netflix, this big Jean-Michel Serrat movie, I'm sure they were like, hey, the script's great, but we need to push it a little bit further. Michael Green, and I'm sure Michael Green costs a lot of money, but the feeling is when you go to Michael Green can fix your problems. Michael Green can take a movie and get it made, And I think, look, that's like the highest of the highest echelon. But I think even at any level, you want people to look at you and say, this is someone who will make my life easier and will make me look good and therefore make my career successful, But that all starts from liking the person. And also, one of the things I talk a lot about with my clients is when you're in a pitch scenario, whether you're pitching them a new idea or you're pitching on a project, the reality is, they don't know if you can do it or not. You might have written a great script, might have written 10 great scripts, but this could be the one you bail out on. But if you have confidence that you can do it, you have to lend them your confidence. And that's what all this is about, is like, yes, you've got talent, but talent isn't enough. What's more important is having the confidence and the vision and being able to convey that to people. And sometimes I think that's quite hard for writers because they think of it as a Charlie Kaufman kind of thing where they're introverts. But it's a very important aspect of this of the Hollywood kind of game.
So let me ask you like a hypothetical situation, what you would tell a client to how to navigate it. Client sells a project. Project's going super well. Like everything's going great. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden notes come in. One day, out of the blue, notes come in that would lobotomize the project.
Right.
Do you get involved at that point? Like, what do you tell the client to do?
Yeah.
Like what happens?
I mean, I get involved in the sense of like, I'm not going to call the producer. I mean, the first thing I would ask is where are those notes coming from, right? And like, let's say they're coming from the movie star. Like, and the movie star is not like, it's not a $5 million horror film with someone who could be replaced like that. It is, if it's Tom Cruise or it's Brad Pitt or someone like that, then those notes are getting done no matter what. Someone told me at one point, they're like, a movie star's note never goes away. Someone deals with it at some point, and it may be you or it may not be you. And
right,
so it depends where those notes are coming from and who they're coming from. I remember we got notes on one project, I won't name what, and they were voluminous. They were like 20 pages long. And then I was like, oh my God, these notes. And the notes basically wanted to rewrite the entire project. And then I got in the room with a really powerful producer who was on it with me, and the guy was like, I don't care about those. Anyways, and so it depends who the notes are from. But and then you also be like, who are my allies in that situation, right? The notes are from the director or from the director's a little trickier, but this from the studio, and you talk to the producer and the producer thinks those notes are crazy too, then you try to figure out fixes for them. I remember I used to work for Andrew Marlowe, who wrote Air Force One, Hallman, End of Days, and created the TV show Castle. I was working for him on Castle, and we used to talk about the notes that he would get. And one thing I learned from him was that you have to figure out a way to make people feel like you're addressing their notes, even if you're doing it in a different direction. So what I would see him do is like, oh, what you want to do is you want to have the murder happen on page 30, and right now it happens on page 45. You're like, oh, you know what? I don't think I can make it happen on page 30. I haven't really figured that out. But instead, what I think we could do is we could have an explosion happen. So you want to, there's something behind that note. What Andrew always called it was, what's the note behind the note? You want to figure that out. But it really depends on the situation and what the political dynamics are of it. Because if Brad Pitt says, I think this character should be a deaf mute, then they're going to be a deaf mute, because that's what he wants to do, at least for one pass of the script. But if it's coming from a junior executive at the studio and the producer thinks it's crazy, then you could maybe be like, oh, maybe that doesn't quite work, but maybe we try this instead. But again, it goes a little back to the problem solver idea, which is don't be like, I'm blowing this whole project up, I'm walking away, because they will find somebody. There's one button on a desk and it says new writer. New director and new star is a lot harder to press, but new writer is the easiest button to press, and no one will ever think, badly of the executive for pressing it. But so someone will do it, but you want to figure out, like, if this is the note, how do I solve this problem?
Got it. And also the other piece that you said that I thought was like great. Figure out who your allies are.
Yes.
Figure out figure out the Game of Thrones of it all. Like, where's
yeah,
right? Because there's a human element to every project.
If you look at like a lot of movie stars, they tend to work with the same writer over and over and over. Tom Cruise used to work all the time with Robert Towne. Now he works with Chris McQuarrie all the time. Will Smith works with Akiva Goldsman all the time. This is because they trust them. Same thing with directors. Directors have writers they return to over and over and over again. It's because they trust their point of view and they trust their vision. And you want, in an ideal world, you want to find those people, those collaborators that you can work with over and over. But again, what you have to do to some degree is putting your ego to the side and saying, okay, it's not my script anymore because I sold it to a studio. Someone's probably going to do this. How do I figure out the best iteration of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's say you have a client, they have a hot spec that you've gone out with, they've had, 6 months of meetings. It just all sort of dries up. They're even writing new material that you're developing with them that you like, but just nothing comes of any of that. How do you right the ship? Or is that when you start to say, okay, this relationship isn't working, maybe it's...
I mean, for me, it wouldn't be 6 months. It'd be more like 3 years or something.
Okay.
It would really be about the next script. And how does that go? And then even after that, probably another script. I've had clients I haven't made any money from for like 3 or 4 years, but I believe in them, So I stay with them. That's fine. I always believe that if I believe in someone, I'm with them ride or die. It's more when they lose faith in my vision or we start to have this situation, which is kind of the same thing, where they're just kind of doing their own thing and I'm hearing about it after the fact, So that's more a situation. For me, I'm not like, oh, I haven't made enough money from you by X point in time. That's I'm not like that. But again, I run my own company. If you're at a larger company and they're looking at your spreadsheet and they're saying, hey, Billy hasn't made you any money in 2 years, you might be in that situation. But for me, it's really about, do I have a vision for this client that they're eventually going somewhere? And like sometimes it has happened where the client still really likes me and we have this stuff, but I just feel like their writing has gone downhill. They're not writing at the same level. They're not pushing themselves like the way that they need to push themselves. Yeah. And that's and I've had to, drop people who I considered friends.
How many times do you warn them and you go, hey, look, you're not pushing yourself, like you're not showing up and writing?
I mean, you never say it exactly like that. What you're doing is you're working on a script with them and you're saying, hey, like, I think this feels a little familiar. Can we push this further? Can we do this? Can we try that? And then it comes back in like a day later and it's like hardly different, That's more what you see happen.
One of the things that I've like really loved and appreciated about you, just as your friend, is one, your clients are not just your clients; they're your family. Literally, also figuratively, also emotionally.
Yes, definitely
right?
Emotionally.
Like you invited me to your birthday party,
40th birthday party, yeah.
Yeah, and I showed up. So many of your clients were there. And they weren't showing up for you because you were, because it didn't feel like a Hollywood networking thing. Let me put it that way, right? It felt like people were showing up for this dude that was out there fighting for them and creating opportunities, right? I've been to the other version,
right,
where it's like super networky. This was not that. This was like a friends and family gala, right?
Also had an open bar, so that helped.
Yeah, the open bar helped. I mean, I didn't drink.
Everybody else did.
Everyone else did. I was watching other people drink. And people asked me why I didn't drink. The other thing about you that I don't want to say this is rare because I feel like that disparages other other representatives of talent.
Unique.
But it is very unique. And when I came into this industry, I assumed all representatives did this. I come to find they don't. You are a master strategist. You like spend a lot of time trying to understand how the entire machine works. And so when you are constructing a plan for a client, it's not just based on, okay, a pirate movie sold last week.
Yeah, let's do a pirate movie.
Let's do a pirate movie.
Right.
Oh, action's hot right now. Oh, I don't know, diversity's hot right now. I
remember once they were like 3D movies are really hot now. We should make this a 3D movie. And I'm like, well, how do we show that in the script? Like maybe in the top you write like, blank, canyons in 3D. And I'm like, oh, okay, we'll put it on the cover page.
So you have the latitude to create a bespoke. I mean, you're creating bespoke strategies for artists that you believe in, right? This isn't just some corporate that
plug plan to be, yeah,
right, or Bradley Cooper wants to play a pirate. Quick, everyone write pirate movies, and one of them will
right, yeah.
That was my experience when I had with past managers was. Big company, just a cog in the machine.
Yeah, and you're very reactionary. You're very like that's definitely a thing I've seen.
So I would love to just kind of showcase your strategy.
Sure.
Just the way your mind works, and you've always been like this, right? Right when you started off, like before you were really a manager, you just always worked this way. You would sit down and be like, "This is happening, that's happening," and I think there's an opportunity here.
Yeah.
And it never felt like it was coming from a place of like hubris or arrogance, and it was very sincere and thoughtful. So I want to showcase that. So let's say I walk in the door, Addy, me right now, right? If I were to walk through the door right now,
right?
What would you tell me your game plan is for me as your rep?
Well, it also depends on like
the
first thing I would say, and you kind of spoke about this something is like, what is your goal? Right. And we've actually talked about this a lot. Like, what is the goal? Because there's a lot of possibilities of who, what you could be, whatever. Like, it really depends on what your goal is. That's how we can make it bespoke, is like what your goal is. And we shape it to that, if you will.
Okay. So let's say my goal is I want to be a co-writer / director of tentpole movies that have an identity, that have a specific identity. So it's not, I don't want to be like making sausage.
You don't, yeah, okay.
But I don't also want to be making stuff that no one sees. I want to make tentpole stuff with an identity.
Right. I mean, in that case, I think we want to focus on getting something made at a reasonable budget level. I mean, look, is the tentpole movie, let's say at this point you've directed no movies, right? At this point, it's going to be like, okay, so the big $100 million budget, that should probably be your third or your fourth movie, And I actually think that's for your own like well-being. You look at something, otherwise you have a cautionary tale, like a Josh Trank kind of situation where you get the machine kind of like rolls over you or you react to it or whatever, And so then it's like, okay, what's the first step? And then the first step is like, we need a concept. And I'm actually working on this with a client right now who doesn't want to direct, but he wants to write. He's like, I want to write big studio action movies. It's like, okay, well, we need an example of that and a reasonable budget level. Look at someone like Rian Johnson. I think Rian Johnson is a great example of something like that. His first movie, Brick, yeah. Right? Really unique spin on a well-known kind of film noir style, done with great actors, done on a very low budget, very stylish, And so that, that was made very cheaply, landed with a big splash. Everybody wanted to work with him. I remember met him as an assistant on a general coming off of Brick. Everybody wanted to work with him. Then he went and made
Brothers Bloom.
The Brothers Bloom, which was perceived in the town as a bit of a step back, essentially. It felt a little too convoluted. I have to confess I've not seen it, but the reaction in town was that, and it didn't do super well financially, I don't think.
No.
I think it's an accurate statement to say creatively it was a step back.
That's how it was perceived.
Yeah.
Perception is kind of the reality to some degree. And so that people are like, well, I don't know, Rian Johnson, I don't know. Again, what did we talk about kind of earlier with Elise? We were talking about how like you can do it once, good on you. If you can do it twice, that's when people really start to pay attention. And then he goes and makes Looper. And Looper is the platonic ideal of an audition for the big leagues kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's how he did it, but it functioned as such, right? It was done for a reasonable budget. I want to say like under $50 million or something like that. I don't really remember. It was also a while ago, so numbers are different back then. But it had 2 great movie star roles.
Looper was 35.
There you go. You know exactly. I figured you might.
Brick was 500K.
Right.
Brothers Bloom was 20.
See, it was a little much. 20 was a little much for that movie.
Yeah. Different time too, because that was back when like 20 didn't necessarily mean theatrical. It was
right.
kind of like DVD.
I remember. I'm gonna tell you a real quick funny story that I heard once, which is Jim Jarmusch. This is like years ago. Gets offered. It's probably apocryphal. Never happened. Gets offered like someone's like, oh, Jim Jarmusch, I love your movie. I want to give you $7 million for your next movie. He's like, that's cool, but I only need 4. And they're like, well, your last movie was great and it made money, so if we made it for 7, therefore it'll make so much more money. He's like, no, my movies always make about X amount of money. If you give me 4, I'll give you a return on it. If you make it for 7, I'll lose money and it'll make it harder for me to make the movie after that. So being smart and savvy about your budget and setting yourself up for success is always a thing. So anyways, then he makes Looper, and I remember leaning over to my friend while we were watching that movie and saying, after this, he can do anything he wants. And he did, right? Yeah. He goes on to make a Star Wars movie, right? Which is like the biggest biggest kind of get of all time. And now he has his Knives Out franchise, which has made him a 100 millionaire. I don't know what the term is for that, So that's kind of the template I think we would talk about with you is like, okay, what are the ideas you have? What's our limitless? What's our like Looper? What's our, I think like the movie Barbarian that's currently in theaters, that is gonna, if Zach Krieger wants it, that will get him to like the $40-50 million range. I think people would trust him with a budget that level. And then that movie's successful, then the movie after that, like take someone like Dan Trachtenberg, right? Dan does a great short film that leads to 10 Cloverfield Lane eventually, and then eventually it leads to Prey. After Prey, he could go if he wants to. I mean, look, Dan's been offered a lot of stuff over the years, so he's really finding his own place that he wants to do, but that's it. But so for you, it'd be like, okay, what's an idea we can do for sub 10 or something like that? Because as a first time director, it's hard to find people to like make a movie for more than that. In fact, it's hard to get actors on board unless you have a great short film that they really see the vision for. I remember even my Tony Gilroy talking about how hard it was to get George Clooney to believe in him, and that's after he'd done all the stuff, after an amazing script and after he'd been one of the biggest writers in town. So it's like under $10 million, maybe even under 5 feels like a smart thing. And what's something that we feel like you can get a lot of really good bang for your buck? What's a concept? Again, I always talk about Limitless because I feel like that's a good example of a movie that functions as a great. It wasn't the director's first movie, I think. But it really functioned as like, hey, wow, okay, you can do a lot with a little, and great movie star role, you know? So what's our that? Okay, let's do that. Hopefully that gets made. Then it's like after that, it's like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next step up? A commercial movie that still feels fresh. Let's do it. Let's try to keep the budget under 30, 25 and under, something like that.
So again, what I love about the way you even phrased this, right, is you had making a movie, we all know how long this takes. This is like a 3 to 5 year process.
Yeah.
Right? Between getting it sold and making it at best. Could even be 7, 8, 9 years. You're thinking 3 movies down.
Right.
So this is at this point, we're like in a brotherhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At that point.
But I mean, you look at like Ram Bergman, who's
Ryan's guy.
And that must have been to some degree maybe a conversation they had. I mean, look, there are people like John Watts who go up some Cop Car. To be fair, done a lot of commercials and other stuff before. And I think did Clown, which wasn't even released at the time. And then he gets Spider-Man, and like obviously those movies are amazing. Look, what I would say, and this is no disrespect to him, but from what you asked of me, is like I don't want to be a cog in someone else's machine. That's the Kevin Feige machine. If you want to be, whereas Rian Johnson, if he wanted, I mean, you could even say that Knives Out is this. He's created his own franchise at this point. Same thing that Chris Nolan has done. Same thing that's, kind of brand name directors. To be a brand name director, you need, like, I would say, like, if Ari Aster wanted to do something like that, like Ari's getting to that point. I don't know if that's what he wants. Yeah. But, you're getting to, like, someone like Damien Chazelle, right? Damien Chazelle is another great example. Whiplash, phenomenal, amazing, leads to La La Land. Did I forget one? La La Land, and it leads to First Man, and then it leads to Babylon, which is $100 million movie that I cannot believe they made just because it's so, I'm excited to see it and I'm happy they made it, but like, wow, that's a big bet. Yeah. But he had got to the point where they felt comfortable bidding on Damien Chazelle to do that. And you have to get to a point where they feel comfortable betting on you. And that doesn't happen after movie 1. And if it does, sometimes it can go really awry. as we've seen before with directors who went like this and then flamed out real quick like that, you know?
It's also weird because I basically stopped doing movies and pivoted into TV.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, even though they're the same, they're like looked at as two different industries, which is its own.
It is kind of fascinating, but also that is something where you can move up a lot more quickly, right? Like you run those shows.
Yes.
You are the complete vision on it in a much bigger scale, where interestingly enough. But that is something where you can move up a lot more quickly as a writer. Maybe not like immediately, like they'll have, if you were to hit a TV show, they would bring a showrunner to supervise you or something like that. But you can, after a couple of seasons, then, you know, like Sam Esmail or something, right? Like Sam, I mean, he directed a movie and all that, but he goes does Mr. Robot. I think they had like a hired hand on for the first season, but after he proved himself,
Yeah.
and now he's like the visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And so interestingly in TV, because it is a lot, features are director oriented. They just are.
Mm-hmm.
Movies are TV is writer oriented, you know, and so you can move into a little more of a power position, a control position more quickly.
We'd like to thank our guest, John Zaozirny, incredible producer, for this really enlightening conversation. And since we brought it up, I'd like to shout out to our colleague, Kenlyn Clark. The Last Jedi is a masterpiece, and all the haters, including Kenlyn, can suck it.